I did the 50/30/20 rule. Zero-based. Cash envelopes. Nothing worked. Until I stopped budgeting like a robot and started budgeting like a human. Now, I sleep, I smile, and I say no without guilt. This is what financial healing actually looks like. Money 101 Mondays. Full episode, now playing on Dollar by Dollar. Watch the full story, the 50/30/20 rule that saved my budget. It always started the same way. A quiet Sunday morning. The smell of burnt toast. And Natalie sitting at the kitchen table, calculator in one hand, credit card bill in the other. She told herself this would be the weekend. She got her finances in order. Again, for the third time this year. Outside, the city yawned beneath the gray weight of late winter. Inside, Natalie stared at a spreadsheet titled 50/30/20 Budget March. It was color-coded, labeled, organized, and completely broken. Because the numbers didn't care how pretty they looked in pastel blue. The rent was still due. The groceries still climbed. The wants column? It had already been empty for months. And no matter how carefully she adjusted the cells, the truth was the same. Her life didn't fit inside this formula. Natalie Reyes was 33, single, and quietly drowning in a kind of math that felt less like arithmetic and more like shame. She earned just under $3,100 a month working full-time as a community outreach coordinator at a nonprofit in Sacramento. It was noble work, fulfilling. She made a difference, but it didn't make the rent cheaper. $1,625. That was her half of the two-bedroom apartment she shared with a friend from grad school. That number alone took up more than half her income. And the 50/30/20 rule? It said no more than 50% should go to needs. But Natalie's needs were already at 67%. That was the part the influencers never mentioned. The ones on YouTube with perfect lighting and whiteboards. They said, spend 50% on needs, 30% on wants, and 20% on savings or debt. Easy, simple, universal. But Natalie couldn't spend 30% on wants. She hadn't been to a movie in 6 months. The last time she ordered takeout was in December, a pizza deal for $7.99 after her water heater burst. Even then, she felt guilty. Her savings? A little over $90. Debt? $9,472 on 2 cards. APR? 23.9%. She wasn't reckless. She didn't buy expensive makeup or designer anything. She drove a 12-year-old Corolla and packed lunch from home. But after student loans, utilities, gas, and groceries, there was nothing left. And so she sat there, again, adjusting the 50/30/20 spreadsheet like it was a magic mirror, hoping if she moved a decimal, her life would change. But it never did. The kitchen light flickered. Her toast had long gone cold. She reached for her mug, only to realize it was empty. Same with her energy. Natalie rubbed her eyes and leaned back in the chair. A soft groan escaped her lips, the kind that lives between exhaustion and hopelessness. "Why can't I figure this out?" she whispered. That was the real question, wasn't it? She wasn't lazy. She wasn't careless. She was just stuck. Across the apartment, her roommate Tara was already gone. Sunday yoga, most likely. Their lives were similar on paper. Both had grad degrees, nonprofit jobs, modest lifestyles. But Tara had a boyfriend who paid half their travel. Parents who gifted her $500 at Christmas. A credit card with cash back and a balance of $0. Natalie had none of that. No safety net. No second income. Just her spreadsheet, and a rule that told her she was failing. She closed the laptop and stood up. The silence pressed in harder than the math. In the hallway mirror, she caught her reflection. Dark circles. Split ends. The quiet fatigue of someone holding everything together by invisible threads. And behind those eyes, shame. Not because she was broke, but because she was supposed to know better. She had a master's degree in public administration. She'd written grants that helped dozens of families. She knew systems, metrics, efficiency, but she couldn't budget her own life. The rest of the day blurred. She did laundry, listened to a podcast about minimalism, scrolled through Reddit threads on frugal living. At one point, she saw a post titled, "Why the 50/30/20 rule doesn't work if you're poor." That stopped her. She clicked. Read every word. Twice. And suddenly, something clicked. It wasn't that she was bad at budgeting. It was that she was following a rule never written for her reality. By evening, she was back at the kitchen table. But this time, the spreadsheet was blank. She opened a new tab, titled it, Natalie's Real Budget. No colors. No presets. Just truth. She typed her actual income, then listed every bill. Then she asked the question the 50/30/20 rule never had time for. What do I need to feel safe? Not just financially, emotionally. She wrote, rent, groceries, car, debt minimums, emergency buffer, $100, therapy copay. Yes, that last one mattered. Then came the next question. What do I value enough to protect? Her answer was short. Time, health, connection, not shoes, not takeout, not streaming. She added a new section, soul budget. It had 3 lines. 1 coffee out per week, $20 monthly for friend's birthday fund, 1 self-care thing, yoga, tea, book. It didn't follow the rule, but it followed her. And that was the moment the story really began. Not with a breakthrough, not with a raise, but with a rejection. Natalie rejected a rule that didn't serve her, and in doing so, started writing one that might. Natalie didn't grow up thinking budgeting was radical. In her house, budgeting was just survival. Her mother, Teresa, had raised 3 kids on a grocery clerk's salary. They had envelopes, not spreadsheets. Rent was paid with crumpled cash. Groceries bought with coupons clipped for newspapers. Birthdays were handmade. Christmas was magical, but always secondhand. Natalie remembered watching her mother kneel on the cracked linoleum of their 2-bedroom apartment in Stockton, whispering over utility bills, scribbling on notepads like she was solving a riddle with no right answer. They never starved, but they never saved. There was no such thing as discretionary income. And yet somehow, Natalie had believed that if she worked hard, got an education, and followed the rules, she'd break free of that cycle. She'd make enough. She'd save enough. She'd never feel that pressure again. But here she was, back at kitchen table, staring at numbers that didn't work. Just like her mom, just like before. Only now the bills were digital, the anxiety quieter, more internalized. She spent the next few days revisiting her budget, not to shrink it, but to interrogate it. Why did so many systems treat budgeting as a personal failure, rather than a structural mismatch? Why did every guide assume you had enough to begin with? Natalie pulled out her work laptop and started reading. She dove into research papers on the wage gap, watched TED Talks about the hidden costs of poverty, transportation, credit scores, late fees. She found a quote that stopped her cold. You're not poor because you're bad with money. You're bad with money because you're poor. It haunted her, because it was true. Being poor meant always reacting, always catching up, always juggling with too few pins and too many flames. Late payments added fees. Credit cards raised interest. Car trouble created overdrafts. And one bad month could undo 3 good ones. She thought of the spreadsheet again. The clean math of the 50/30/20 rule, where needs are capped at 50%. But how do you cap needs when you don't control their cost? Natalie's rent alone was 52% of her income. Not luxury rent, not even solo rent, just the market rate for a decent shared place in a safe neighborhood. Add car insurance, gas, minimum debt payments, and groceries. She was at 80%, before she even touched savings, before $1 went to anything resembling joy. That night, she called her mom. It was late. Teresa answered on the 3rd ring. Naughty? Everything okay? There was always that pause in her voice, the one that held 30 years of financial tightrope walking. Yeah, Natalie said, forcing a smile even through the phone. Just thinking about budgets. And how hard this all is. A pause, then a soft laugh. Oh, Mija, you're learning what we all learn eventually. Budgets don't fix broken systems. They just help you survive them. Natalie nodded. That was it. That was the missing piece. She'd been trying to fit into a system that never made space for her. But maybe, just maybe, she could build something different. Over the next week, Natalie became obsessed. She printed out her bank statements, used highlighters like crime scene markers. She joined budgeting subreddits, watched YouTubers with 9-to-5 jobs and side hustles. But she filtered every tip through a single lens. Will this work in the real world I live in? Because she didn't want fantasy budgets. She wanted battle-tested ones. For people with rent over 50%. With credit cards they didn't choose. With jobs that capped raises at 3% and praised passion over pay. One night, she came across a tweet that led her down a rabbit hole. The 50/30/20 rule was designed for two-income households with no debt. Try 70/10/10/10 instead. It was like flipping a switch. The idea was this: 70% for needs, 10% for savings, 10% for debt, 10% for wants. It wasn't magical, but it made room for reality. She tested it. Her numbers still didn't fit perfectly, but for the first time they almost did, and that gave her something she hadn't felt in a while: hope. She created a new spreadsheet, not based on ratios, but priorities. She called it non-negotiables first: rent, groceries, minimum debt, transportation, health. She totaled those, then worked backwards. If she had $150 left, how should it move? She decided to split it: $50 to savings, $50 to a credit card, $50 for joy. That last part was the hardest, because she still didn't feel like she deserved joy. But she made herself do it. Because if her budget didn't include life, then what was she budgeting for? Then came the hardest question of all: what is enough? She didn't have an answer yet, but she was starting to ask. And that was new. That was powerful. Because budgeting wasn't about restriction anymore. It was about clarity, agency, peace. Even in a broken system, even without a raise, even without a perfect rule, Natalie was starting to build something sustainable. Not a spreadsheet fantasy, but a real-life foundation. One honest dollar at a time. Payday used to feel like oxygen. That moment when the direct deposit landed. It was a kind of relief Natalie could feel in her chest, like unclenching a muscle she hadn't realized was tight. She would refresh her bank app obsessively the night before, then again the morning of. And finally, with a soft exhale, she'd see it. Plus $2, $769.83. Tidy. Predictable. Like the system had worked. But it never stayed. Because what followed was always the same too. A mental sprint through every expense she'd been holding back. Auto payments began to clear. Bills were due within 24 hours. Groceries were already low. Gas tank on E. Card minimums, flashing red. Payday wasn't relief. It was reset. Just enough to prevent disaster. Never enough to build anything new. Natalie stood in line at the credit union ATM that morning, the late February wind tugging at her coat sleeves. She knew the routine. Withdraw $160 in cash. Break it into envelopes. Groceries, gas, personal. But today was different. Her gas tank was already below the warning light. Groceries were thin, and her sister, Marissa, had texted her late the night before. Mom's blood pressure meds cost more this month. She didn't say anything, but I know she skipped a dose last week. Natalie stared at that message for 10 minutes in silence, then replied, "I'll send something tomorrow." Now tomorrow was today, and the numbers didn't stretch that far. Inside the bank vestibule, Natalie punched in her PIN with numb fingers. $2,769.83. Her eyes hovered over the balance. It felt like so much and so little. She pulled out $200. Half would go to her cash envelopes. The rest, she'd Venmo her sister later. She hadn't planned for this. But what else could she do? Her mom never asked for help. But she'd raised 3 kids alone. Natalie owed her more than money. So like always, she adjusted, bent, rearranged the puzzle pieces. Told herself she'd make it work. Back at the apartment, she laid the money out like evidence. $200 in clean 20s. The envelope system she'd borrowed from a YouTube couple. It had saved her more than once. Groceries, $80. Gas, $40. Personal, $20. Mom's meds, $60. She stared at the last one. That was her wants budget this month. Gone. No coffee shop days. No Friday night wine. No thrift store therapy. And she accepted that. But it still stung. Because budgeting wasn't just about math. It was about grief. Letting go of small joys because the big obligations screamed louder. She grabbed a Sharpie and labeled the envelopes. One for food. One for fuel. One for her mother. Each dollar folded with care. Each line drawn with quiet resolve. Her stomach growled. She hadn't had breakfast. But it was okay. She had eggs. Maybe toast, if the bread hadn't gone stale. At work, the office buzzed with a strange cheerfulness. It was grant week, chaos and caffeine and urgent emails. But something else was in the air. A new hire had started. Rebecca, mid-20s, fresh from UC Berkeley, confident in a way Natalie used to be. She brought out milk in glass bottles, had a standing desk set up on her first day, and talked about how she was building her emergency fund this quarter. Natalie didn't resent her, but she envied that language. The idea that budgeting was a strategy, not a defense mechanism. During lunch, Natalie sat at her desk, slowly chewing a sandwich made from the last of her turkey and generic mustard. Rebecca breezed by, paused. Hey, a bunch of us are doing sushi happy hour Friday if you want to join. Natalie blinked. Oh, thanks. I'll have to check. But she already knew the answer. $20 sushi nights didn't fit in her budget. Not this week. Not for a while. She smiled anyway. And when Rebecca walked away, Natalie stared at her half-eaten sandwich. Not jealous. Not bitter. Just tired. Because sometimes budgeting felt like watching life happen from behind a pane of glass. That night, she opened her notebook. The same one she now called her budget recovery journal. Every page held numbers, but also feelings, thoughts, moments like today. She wrote, paycheck landed. Sent $60 to Marissa for mom. Down to $20 for fun this month. I'm not mad. Just sad, but also proud. Because I'm not letting shame win this time. Then she added a note. Repeat this. I'm doing the best I can with what I have. And she underlined it. Twice. Later, in bed, she did the math again. After fixed bills, her leftover was around $310 this month. Not nothing, but not enough. She thought about the 50/30/20 rule again. It still taunted her, because if she followed it, she'd need $930 for wants and savings combined. She had $310. Not even close. But what if she flipped the logic? Instead of comparing herself to the rule, she could ask what her version would look like. She opened the calculator app. $2,770 after-tax income. Needs, $2,100, 76%. Wants, $90, 3%. Debt, $220, 8%. Savings, $360, 13%. Not ideal, but real. Honest. Hers. She jotted it down. The Reyes ratio. A budgeting rule for people like her. Not broken, just building from the bottom. And somewhere in that quiet, in a bedroom lit only by her charging phone, Natalie smiled. Because she hadn't failed. The math just had more context now. And with that, she closed her eyes. Not rich, not free, but stronger. Tomorrow would ask for more. But tonight, she had a plan. And that was enough. It started with a noise. A strange, grinding whine beneath the hood of Natalie's car. The kind of sound that didn't belong to any playlist, that pierced through even the loudest podcast, and grew louder when she turned left. At first, she ignored it, turned up the volume, kept driving. She'd been burned by panic before. Had spent $300 once on a diagnostic that turned out to be a loose gas cap. But this was different. By the third day, the noise came with a warning light, and a kind of steering hesitation that turned every corner into a gamble. So on Thursday morning, after parking 2 blocks from her office, Natalie sat in her car and stared at the dashboard for a long time. Then she whispered, "Please don't be expensive." But cars don't care about whispers, or spreadsheets, or the fact that your emergency fund is a sticky note on a fridge and a dream you haven't had time to chase. At the mechanic, the news landed with the thud of inevitability. Power steering pump. It's leaking fluid like a sieve, the guy said. Estimate, $843.74. Natalie stood there in her work flats, nodding slowly like the sound hadn't just rearranged her entire month. She asked if it was urgent. He shrugged. You could risk it, but if it fails mid-turn? Not good. She thanked him, told him she'd call back, then walked to the corner, dialed her mom, but didn't press send, because she already knew the answer. Her mother would offer. Her sister too. But Natalie couldn't keep borrowing from people who didn't have more either. She went home and stared at her budget. Emergency fund, $0. She'd started one. Twice. Once last summer. Got it to $180 before a surprise copay wiped it out. Then again after Christmas. Made it to $60 before groceries went long. It wasn't that she didn't want to save. It was that her life made it impossible to be consistent. The 50/30/20 rule said to put 20% towards savings or debt. That was $554 a month on her income. She'd never hit that. Not even close. Usually it was 5%, sometimes 10%, sometimes nothing. And this month, nothing. Because $60 went to her mom, and the rest had gone to gas and food and rent. She opened her credit card app. Balance, $4,417. Available credit, $203. One card maxed, the other close. She stared at the screen and felt her stomach twist. There was no good option, only a less bad ones. She called the mechanic, scheduled the repair, then transferred $500 from her rent buffer, the little margin she kept in checking so her rent wouldn't bounce if autopay ran early. The rest, she put on the credit card. It wasn't smart. It wasn't empowering, but it was necessary. That night, she sat at the kitchen table in silence. The apartment was still. Her roommate was out. Natalie sipped a cup of weak tea, staring at the wall. And then she cried. Not loud. Not for long. Just the quiet kind. The kind you hide from even yourself. Because she'd been doing everything right. She cut expenses, tracked spending, made a plan, chose the cheaper options. And still, one car repair shattered everything. That's the part most people don't talk about. How fragile it feels when your life doesn't have a buffer. When your margin for error is less than $100. When your emergency fund is a credit card and a prayer. Natalie wiped her face, opened her journal, and wrote, I'm not going to pretend this isn't hard, but I'm also not going to give up. Then she did something she hadn't done before. She made a new tab on her spreadsheet, titled Resilience Plan. It had only one item. Emergency Fund, goal, $1,000. She didn't know when she'd get there, but it would be the first savings goal she would build for one reason only, to feel safe. She added another note. Even if it takes a year, I'll get there. Because peace of mind wasn't optional anymore. It was urgent. The next day at work, she walked past the break room and overheard two coworkers talking. One mentioned how their water heater died. The other nodded, said it cost $1,100 to fix. No sweat. Put on the Amex and paid it off last month. Natalie smiled politely and walked past. But inside, something burned. Not anger, not jealousy, just longing. For a version of life where one broken part didn't threaten the whole machine. That weekend, she opened a new account. Online only. High yield. No debit card access. She nicknamed it Emergency Only. Then she transferred $10. That was it. But it was sacred. A promise to her future self. That when the next noise came, the next please don't be expensive moment, she'd be a little more ready. And that mattered. More than the rule. More than the shame. More than the system. The next morning, Natalie walked to her car. The steering felt smooth again. Silent. Responsive. She gripped the wheel, turned out of the parking spot, and took a deep breath. She was still in debt. Still behind. Still building. But the car worked. The budget lived. And that $10, sitting quietly in a digital vault, whispered, we're not going back. Debt changes your posture. Not just physically, though Natalie had learned to hunch over the credit card reader at the grocery store, shielding the screen like it was a confession. But emotionally, it seeps into your identity, until you stop saying, I have debt, and start saying, I am bad with money. And that's what Natalie was beginning to realize. She didn't just owe money. She carried shame. It started years before. Student loans first. The kind that felt like monopoly money at age 19. Then, after college, the starter card. $500 limit. 19% interest. She used it to buy groceries while working her unpaid internship in D.C. Then gas. Then a suit for interviews. She told herself she'd pay it off after she got the job. But the job was $36,000 a year, and the rent was $1,000. The balance crept. Then she opened another card with a 0% promo rate. Balance transfer. More breathing room. Then more emergencies. By 27, she had over $8,000 in credit card debt and a resume full of nonprofit work that looked noble but paid dust. And the worst part, she never told anyone. Not her mom. Not her sister. Not even Tara, her roommate and friend since grad school. Because in her world, being in debt wasn't just a financial reality. It felt like a personal failure. One afternoon, she sat on her bed, scrolling through her credit app. It had a new feature, a pie chart labeled Debt Breakdown. Her eyes traced the segments. Chase, $4,417. Capital One, $3,089. Student Loan, $12,800. Total, $20,306. The number didn't shock her anymore. What it was how long she'd avoided looking at it. It was easier to make minimum payments and pretend, to see debt as this fog she lived inside. Not a wall she could measure, attack, and dismantle. But that was about to change. Natalie opened her journal, the one she'd started calling her money book, even though it held more feelings than figures. She wrote, "Debt is not a personality trait. I'm not my balance." Then she made 2 lists. List A, things debt made me believe. I'm irresponsible. I'm behind. I don't deserve rest. I can't have nice things. I'll always be stuck. List B, things that are actually true. I've always made rent. I helped Mom when she needed me. I'm trying, every day. I've paid over $7,000 in principal already. I care, and that means I'm not lost. She stared at those lists until the tears came. Not big sobs, just that quiet overflow that happens when you finally let yourself be kind. She remembered something she'd read on Reddit. Debt isn't moral. It's math, and that was the shift. Because morality had no place in her bank statements. Only strategy did. Natalie made a new plan. Not to pay everything at once. Not to go scorched earth. But to face the mountain and walk it slowly. She labeled her cards. Chase, 23.9% interest. Target 1. Capital One, 17.6%. Target 2. She created a snowball spreadsheet, even though her balances weren't tiny. She'd pay $30 extra toward Chase this month. Not because it would fix everything, but because it was motion. And motion meant power. Still, the shame lingered. Until one night, during a casual dinner, Tara said something unexpected. They were sitting on the floor, eating lentil soup, the cheap kind they both secretly loved. And Tara, mid-sip, casually mentioned, "I'm finally almost done paying off my last credit card. Took me 3 years. Natalie blinked. "You had credit card debt?" Tara laughed. "Oh yeah. Grad school wrecked me. I had $11,000 on 3 cards. You didn't." Natalie looked down, then said, softly, "I do. Still." And just like that, a weight loosened. Because debt wasn't a moral failing. It wasn't a scarlet letter. It was normal. Too normal. That night, Natalie wrote something new in her journal. Shame thrives in silence. I'm not hiding anymore. And the next morning, she made a bold move. She called Capital One, asked about reducing her APR. The rep told her no, but transferred her to someone else, who said yes. They'd lower it 3% if she set up autopay. It wasn't a miracle, but it would save her $200 this year. And more than that, it reminded her, asking is a financial skill, and so is persistence. The next day, she shared a post in a personal finance Facebook group. She wrote, "I'm 33. I've made mistakes. I have $20,000 in debt, but I'm done being ashamed. I'm building a new budget, a new plan, and a new story. If you've ever felt behind, you're not alone." The comments came fast. Hearts, encouragement, tips. One person replied, "Debt doesn't define you. How you respond to it does." Natalie copied that, pasted it into her lock screen wallpaper. Read it every morning for the next month. Because here's the thing about debt. It doesn't care how you feel. It just exists. But the story you attach to it, that changes everything. Natalie didn't become debt-free that month, or the next. But she stopped apologizing for being in process. She stopped waiting to feel worthy. She started seeing her financial journey not as a series of failures, but as a series of adaptations. And that shift, that quiet, stubborn rewrite, was everything. Because budgets might change. Incomes rise. Debt shrinks. But your identity? That's yours to reclaim. And Natalie had started the work. Not just of paying debt, but of forgiving herself. And that was the most powerful payment of all. It didn't happen with confetti. There were no fireworks. No surprise refund check in the mail. No miracle raise. Just a quiet Saturday morning. The sun slipping through the curtains. And Natalie's fingers hovering over her phone as she opened her bank app. For once, her heartbeat didn't spike. Because for the first time in over a year, she wasn't overdrawn. It had taken 31 days. But this month, for the first time, the budget held. Nothing crashed. No surprise bills. No forgotten auto pay. It wasn't perfect, but worked. And that changed everything. Natalie sat at the kitchen table with her journal and a fresh cup of coffee. She had $27 left in her checking account, $15 in her cash envelope for groceries, and, for the first time, $32 in her emergency fund. Not much, but survival math had finally turned into strategy. The difference wasn't income. Her paycheck was still the same. The rent hadn't gone down. The gas prices hadn't dropped. But her clarity had sharpened. She'd made 4 big changes this month, and they made all the difference. First, she planned backward. Instead of starting with the 50/30/20 formula and trying to fit her life inside it, she started with her reality, every fixed cost, every non-negotiable, and worked backwards. She didn't feel like a failure for spending 70% on needs. She accepted it, owned it, budgeted around it. Second, she automated what she could. She set up auto pay for her Chase card. Just a minimum, but still, it meant one less thing to forget. One less late fee to risk. She also split her direct deposit into 2 accounts. $50 from each paycheck now went directly into her emergency fund, automatically. So instead of waiting to save what was left, she saved first, even if it was small. Third, she redefined wants. This month, she gave herself $40 to spend however she wanted. No guilt, no judgment, just choice. She used $12 to buy a used poetry book she loved in college, $18 on a solo matinee movie ticket, the first movie she'd seen in a theater in over a year, and the rest? A lavender candle. It wasn't extravagant, but felt like breath. Because the point of a budget isn't to punish, it's to protect what matters. And joy matters. Fourth, she tracked every dollar. Not just what she spent, but how it made her feel. Every Sunday, she reviewed her journal. Not just the numbers, but the moments. She labeled things. Necessary, regret, delight, unexpected. The goal wasn't to judge. It was to observe, to learn what felt like alignment, and what didn't. By the 3rd week, something shifted. She stopped feeling like she was chasing her money, and started feeling like she was guiding it. Not perfectly, but intentionally. And that shift, from panic to purpose, changed everything. One night, she got invited to dinner. A casual thing. A few coworkers, a ramen spot downtown. She checked her envelope. She had $11 left in fun. The bowl she liked was $13. In the past, she would have gone, put on her card, told herself it didn't matter. But now, she said yes, and ate before she went. Ordered tea instead. Still laughed. Still showed up. And when someone offered to split the bill, she said, "I just had tea. I'll cover mine." No shame. No lie. Just honesty. And that felt new. By the end of the month, her total spending matched her plan within $6. She'd never done that before. She wrote a note in her journal. "This is the month I proved I could do it. Not because everything went right, but because I stayed in the game." That Sunday night, she celebrated. Not with champagne. Not with a shopping spree. She baked banana bread, listened to a podcast on financial independence, lit the lavender candle, watched the numbers settle into place. And for the first time in a long time, she slept easy. Because this wasn't the end. She wasn't debt-free. She wasn't financially independent. But she was in motion. And the budget, her real one, the messy, human, resilient one, had finally started to carry her. On the last page of her notebook for that month, she drew a mountain. Not as something looming, but as something she was climbing. And she wrote beneath it. The first month that worked. Not because I was perfect, but because I refused to give up. It was a Tuesday, the kind that feels harmless, quiet, average. Natalie was halfway through her afternoon at the nonprofit, headphones in, spreadsheets open, sipping the lukewarm end of her second coffee. She was updating the outreach calendar when her phone buzzed. It was a name she hadn't seen in a while. Marissa, sister. She answered with a soft, "Hey," already bracing, because midday calls never brought good news. "It's Mom." 2 words. Then silence. Natalie closed her laptop and stood up. "Talk to me." Marissa explained in a rush. "Dizzy spell. Fall in the kitchen. Hospital visit. They were running tests. She's okay. I mean, she's conscious. But something's off, and her blood pressure was sky high. Natalie didn't ask why their mother hadn't called herself. She already knew. Teresa Reyes didn't want to worry them, even if she was in pain, even if her leg was swelling and her heart was fluttering like a trapped bird. Natalie grabbed her bag, told her boss it was a family emergency, and drove straight to Stockton. The 2-hour ride felt longer, like she was driving into a storm she couldn't see, only feel. At the hospital, she found her mother sitting up in bed, pale but stubborn as ever. "I'm fine, Mija. Just got lightheaded. That kitchen floor needed mopping anyway." Natalie pulled up a chair. "Mom, you blacked out. You hit your head." Teresa waved her hand. Barely a bump. But Natalie saw the bandage, the monitors, the nurse notes on the whiteboard that said, "Cardiology consult requested." She also noticed the fraying cuffs of her mom's sweater, the untouched food tray, and the pharmacy bag on the table with a copay label still on it. $89.67. Her stomach sank. Marissa returned with a coffee. Natalie took it, but didn't drink. Instead, she pulled out her phone, opened her budgeting app. Her emergency fund, just this week, had hit $48.20. Her credit cards were still heavy from last month's car repair, and rent was due in 12 days. There wasn't room for this. But this was happening, because emergencies don't wait until the budget is ready. They stayed at the hospital for hours. Natalie asked questions, took notes, learned about hypertension spikes, discussed medication adjustments, tried not to panic when a nurse mentioned follow-up appointments and testing. And when it was all over, when Teresa was clear to go home with prescriptions and referrals in hand, Natalie walked her to the car and promised, "We got this. Don't worry about the cost." But as she said it, she could feel the weight of the words. Because she didn't have it. Not financially, not comfortably, but she'd find a way. That night, back in her childhood bedroom, Natalie sat on the twin bed she hadn't slept in since college. Same posters on the wall, same creaky dresser, same ache in her chest. She stared at her phone screen in the dark, opened her budget spreadsheet, then the emergency fund tab, and for a long time, she just sat there. She was tired. Not just today tired, but soul tired, because life kept asking for more than her budget could offer. And every time she gained momentum, something snapped. The 50/30/20 rule didn't talk about this. About caregiving, about sick parents, about choosing between groceries and generics. She'd built her month with care, had tracked every cent, planned for joy, for discipline, for growth. But not for this. Not for this version of emergency. The next morning, she drove her mom to the follow-up appointment, paid the $45 copay with a credit card she'd sworn not to touch, picked up the adjusted prescriptions. Total cost, $117.33. By the end of the day, her fund envelope was empty. Her buffer? Gone. Emergency fund? Down to $3.20. That night, back home in Sacramento, Natalie sat in silence. And she didn't cry, because there was nothing left in her to spill. She made tea, stared out the window, watched the cars pass by in rows. And then, she opened her journal, wrote just 2 words, "Still standing." Because despite the setback, she hadn't collapsed. She'd adapted. Again. Was it pretty? No. Was it sustainable? Not entirely. But she'd shown up. For her mom. For her life. And that mattered. Later that week, she revisited her budget. Not to punish it, but to patch it. To learn. She started a new column. Emotional resilience. And wrote, "Emergency fund target. $500 for real emergencies. Buffer. $100 for pop-up costs. Caregiver category. TBD." It wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about identity. About who she was becoming. Someone who didn't quit when things got hard. Someone who didn't let one crisis erase her progress. Because the truth was, this month had broken her budget. But not her. The following Sunday, she returned to her systems. To her grocery list. Her envelope routine. Her planner. She meal prepped lentils and rice. Made iced tea from scratch. Watched YouTube videos about sinking funds and future-proofing. And she didn't do it because she was inspired. She did it because she had to. Because quitting wasn't an option. And because the setback, as painful as it was, didn't mean she was starting over. It meant she was still on the road, just on a hillier stretch. Natalie didn't tell many people about what happened, but she did talk to Tara. And when she finished the story, the ER, the drive, the prescriptions. Tara looked at her with quiet admiration and said, "You're kind of amazing, you know that?" Natalie smiled weakly. "I feel more like duct tape." But in that moment, she realized, duct tape holds things together. And maybe that's what strength really is. Not being unbreakable, but being willing to bend, to bridge, to try again. By month's end, her spreadsheet was a mess. Negative numbers, crossed out goals, arrows and adjustments. But one thing stood out. Her commitment hadn't cracked. She was still budgeting, still showing up, still fighting for a life with margin. And maybe that was the point. Not perfection, but perseverance. The candle was $11. Lavender and patchouli, in a heavy glass jar. Natalie picked it up, put it down, picked it up again. She stood there in the aisle of the co-op store, surrounded by herbal teas and essential oils, holding that small flame in waiting in both hands like a question. She didn't need it. It wouldn't feed her. It wouldn't pay off debt. It wouldn't repair her mom's aging water heater, but made her breathe easier just to smell it. And that was worth something. Natalie put the candle in her cart. She walked to the checkout line with a quiet resolve she hadn't felt in months. Not rebellious, not reckless, just certain. She had $18 in her joy envelope. The candle was $11. She could afford this. And not just financially. She could afford to feel good. That purchase marked a turning point. Not because it was big, but because it was allowed. For so long, Natalie had seen joy as optional, frivolous, a luxury reserved for people whose budgets weren't already bleeding. If it wasn't a necessity, it didn't belong. That's what she'd learned, implicitly, through years of scarcity. Joy came last. Joy was earned. Joy had to wait. But now, she saw it differently. Joy wasn't a reward for being responsible. It was a tool for staying responsible. Without it, the budget cracked under the weight of sacrifice. With it, everything softened, even the pressure. She started small. She renamed her wants category. Not discretionary, not miscellaneous, but simply joy. And each month, she gave it $40. No guilt, no explanation, just permission. In her journal, she made a new page. Things that make me feel rich but aren't. She filled it slowly. Fresh library books, long baths with Epsom salts, lavender candles, Trader Joe's dark chocolate with sea salt, a cup of coffee outside on Sunday mornings, Spotify playlist curations, walking through expensive neighborhoods pretending she lived there. These weren't expensive, but they made her feel human, creative, rooted, and that mattered. That month, something remarkable happened. She stuck to her budget for the third time in a row, not because she was strict, but because she was satisfied. She wasn't starving her joy anymore. So she didn't binge when things felt hard. She didn't impulse spend just to feel alive, because she'd already carved out space for aliveness. On the second Saturday of the month, she took herself on a date. Just her. A free art exhibit downtown, followed by a walk along the river. She brought a book and a thermos of tea. Total cost, $0. She journaled by the water. I'm learning that joy doesn't have to cost money, but it does require time, and the belief that I'm allowed to feel good, even before I'm debt-free. It was a concept she began to call sustainable sacrifice, not going without endlessly, not punishing herself for past mistakes, but making the journey livable, bearable, beautiful even. Tara noticed. "You're lighter lately," she said one evening. They were meal prepping together, lentils again, but with more seasoning this time. Natalie smiled. "I'm budgeting for joy." Tara laughed. "That sounds like a book title." Natalie shrugged. "Maybe it is." She started sharing her small wins online again. This time, not just the numbers, but the moments. A post of her $3 thrift store find, a scarf that made her feel like spring, a snapshot of her tea thermos and a park bench, a clip of her favorite poem, handwritten in her planner. Each one a tiny rebellion against the narrative that broke equals broken. You can be rebuilding and joyful at the same time. That was her message. And people responded. With hearts. With gratitude. With their own lists of cheap luxuries that saved my sanity. Then came a DM from someone named Lexi. Early 20s. Working 2 jobs. Single mom. She wrote, "Your posts make me feel like I'm not broken for still wanting to smile." Natalie cried reading that. Because that was exactly how she'd felt for years. Like smiling was irresponsible. Like softness was a sin if your bank balance was low. But now, Now she knew better. Joy isn't a distraction. It's a lifeline. She even made a new category in her spreadsheet. Joy audit. Every month, she tracked her $40 joy spending like a scientist. Not to restrict it, but to study what actually nourished her. In March, it was the candle, the matinee movie, and a $6 plant she named Gloria. In April, it was a new mug and a spontaneous dance class. In May, it was nothing material, just a Saturday set aside for silence. She started rating purchases. Did this feel like medicine or dopamine? Was this escape or expression? And with every note, she got better at choosing joy on purpose. The budget still had its rough days. Unexpected vet bills. Grocery prices climbing. Interest charges she hadn't escaped yet. But her relationship to money and herself was different now. Because she had room, not just for bills, but for breath. And that's what kept her going. One Sunday, she sat in the park with her journal and wrote, "I used to believe I had to suffer to prove I was serious. Now I believe joy is the reason I've made it this far." Then she looked up, watched the trees sway, listened to children laughing in the distance, and felt rich, not in dollars, not in net worth, but in presence, in peace, in purpose. Natalie still hadn't beat the 50/30/20 rule. She wasn't using it the way they taught it, but she'd built something better, a budget that saw her as a person, not a robot. And the biggest change, joy had its own line, and she never deleted it again. It wasn't the spreadsheets that broke her, not the envelopes, not the gas prices or the slow-chugging debt. It was the alarm, that blaring, soulless alarm at 6:05 a.m. on a Wednesday. The sound of another day that required too much. Of her body, her brain, her bank account. Natalie rolled over, hit snooze with a groan, and stared at the ceiling. For a full 5 minutes, she didn't move. Not because she was tired, but because she was hollow. She didn't want to check her budget, didn't want to meal prep, didn't want to be disciplined or intentional or anything that sounded like productivity. She just wanted to disappear. Burnout doesn't ask permission. It arrives quietly, then builds like static behind your eyes. And it doesn't care how good your financial plan is. It doesn't respect your no-spend month or your emergency fund. Natalie had been holding herself together with systems and mantras, but now she was frayed, worn down from always having to try, to stretch, to justify every dollar, to be resilient without pause. And on this morning, she didn't feel strong. She felt like screaming. By 7:22 a.m., she was at the kitchen table, eyes glazed, scrolling through her calendar. 12 meetings this week, 3 budget coaching videos bookmarked, a grocery run to plan, credit card payment reminder, a meal prep list titled, "Stretch $25 in 6 days." The sight of it all made her stomach turn, because budgeting had become another thing she had to perform, another thing she could fail at. And in that moment, she hated it, not because it wasn't working, but because it was exhausting. That night, after work, she ignored the meal plan. Ordered Thai food, $18.64. It was supposed to be one night off, but then came 2, then 3. She skipped a journal session, skipped tracking receipts, didn't open her spreadsheet for a week, and it felt good, until it didn't. On Friday, her card got declined at the grocery store, $34 in the account. She lost track. A week of quiet rebellion had left her scrambled. Natalie sat in the car afterward, forehead against the steering wheel, shame rising like heat. How did I let slip? But deep down, she already knew. It wasn't about the numbers. It was about the weight of always trying to do everything right, of being vigilant all the time. Budgeting had become a second job, unpaid and unrelenting. And she couldn't keep going like this. That weekend, she did something radical. She shut everything down, closed her budgeting apps, put the envelopes in a drawer, lit a candle, sat on the floor, and gave herself permission to rest, not just physically, but emotionally, financially, spiritually, because burnout wasn't a sign that she was weak. It was a sign that the system, even the good one she'd built, needed gentleness. She called it her budget detox weekend, and for 48 hours, she didn't track anything. She didn't restrict, didn't optimize, didn't hack. She just lived, made toast with butter, watched an old sitcom in bed, took a nap without guilt, read a book just for pleasure. And somewhere in that silence, something clicked. She didn't need another rule. She needed rhythm. On Sunday night, she opened her journal and wrote, "Discipline without softness becomes a cage. I'm not here to be efficient. I'm here to be well." The next morning, she sat down with her budget, but not to edit it, to ask it questions. What feels heavy? What feels forced? Where am I budgeting from fear instead of care? She circled 3 answers. Tracking every expense down to the cent. Planning every meal with 0 margin. Saying no to everything labeled fun outside her envelope. And just like that, she restructured her approach. She made 3 small shifts. 1. The feelings first check-in. Every Sunday, before opening her spreadsheet, she'd write how she felt. Tired, rushed, calm. She'd let her energy guide how she approached the week. 2. The lazy meals list. Instead of shaming herself for not meal prepping perfectly, she created a list of 5 go-to meals that were cheap and 0 stress. Rice plus frozen veggies plus eggs. Peanut butter toast plus banana. Lentils plus naan. Canned soup plus crackers. Couscous plus chickpeas. 3. The burnout buffer. A $20 fund, separate from her joy envelope, specifically for crisis fatigue. Takeout. Rideshare when walking felt like too much. A new pillow when she hadn't slept well in a week. It wasn't necessary in the budget math, but it was survival. Tara noticed the change again. "You seem softer lately," she said. "Less tight around the edges." Like she wasn't clenching her teeth through the week. Natalie smiled. "I stopped trying to win budgeting. I started making it fit my nervous system." Tara blinked. "Okay, that needs to be a t-shirt." They both laughed. From then on, Natalie gave herself grace. She didn't quit budgeting. She rehumanized it. Made it breathe. Let flex. She stopped forcing zero-based perfection. Let herself round up or down. Used averages. If she missed a day of tracking, fine. If she needed to recharge and order takeout, okay. If she bought candles again, still budgeting. Because this wasn't about rigidity. It was about staying in the game. And burnout wasn't the end. It was just a signal, a blinking light, that she was pushing too hard. Natalie wrote a new mantra in her journal. "I want a budget I can live with, not one I have to survive." She started sharing more honestly online, not just her victories, but her detours. And it resonated. People commented, "Thank you for naming this. I thought I was the only one who got tired of always tracking. I needed this kind of budgeting too." Natalie didn't solve everything, but she shifted. And that shift, from punishment to permission, kept her going. Because in the end, the real success wasn't in a perfectly balanced spreadsheet. It was in not giving up on herself when things got messy. It was in resting, then returning, breathing, then budgeting, listening, then leading. Burnout still came around sometimes, whispered from the corners of her to-do list. But now, Natalie answered it with a plan. A budget that didn't just track dollars, but honored energy. And that, she realized, was the most sustainable kind of wealth. It didn't look like early retirement, or 6-figure investments, or a paid-off house in the woods. Natalie's version of financial freedom was smaller, quieter, but no less sacred. It was waking up without dread. It was knowing rent was paid, on time, with a buffer in the bank. It was grocery shopping with a list and no panic. It was a journal with goals that felt like choices, not punishments. Freedom, for her, wasn't about having more. It was about needing less and fearing less. One morning in May, she sat on her tiny balcony, coffee in hand, and looked at her calendar. 2 years ago, she would have scanned it for bills, for due dates, for looming problems. Today, she saw a day off. She saw a scheduled walk with her friend Chelsea. She saw a reminder to check her savings balance. Not because she was behind, but because she was on track. She saw space. And space, to Natalie, was freedom. It had taken her over a year of trial and error, of spreadsheets, of resets, of systems built, broken, and rebuilt again. She had cried, laughed, pulled meals from near-empty fridges, watched car repairs drain her account, watched herself bounce back, not with money magic, but with honest budgeting built around reality. And eventually, that reality began to shift. She had reached a quiet milestone last week. Her emergency fund had passed $750. She hadn't touched it in 4 months. Not because life had been perfect, but because she'd built buffers. Because she'd said no when it counted. Because she had choices now. And that made all the difference. Natalie's debt was still there, around $11,000 now, but shrinking. She made extra payments most months. Not massive ones, but steady. $40 here, $75 there. Little chips at the stone. She stopped obsessing over the debt-free date. Started focusing on behavioral consistency instead. Because freedom wasn't a finish line. It was the rhythm of being in control again. Her budget these days wasn't complicated, but it was hers. She called it the Reyes Flow. A living, breathing document. One that flexed with her cycles of energy, income, and rest. It included 70% to needs, 10% to joy, 10% to savings, 10% to debt. And it worked. Not because the math was magical, but because she stopped fighting her life and started budgeting for it. She'd never gone back to the 50/30/20 rule. Not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete, too rigid, too assumptive, too blind to nuance. The kind of rule that sounded great on paper, but didn't hold up under inflation, under caregiving, under burnout. She didn't need a rule. She needed a mirror, a budget that reflected her truth. Financial freedom, for Natalie, now meant saying yes to spontaneous brunch without guilt, having a sinking fund for car insurance, buying birthday gifts without putting them on credit, covering her mom's copay without financial fear, going a full month without checking her bank balance every day, and most of all, sleeping well. One night, she dreamed she was in a grocery store, walking the aisles without a list, grabbing what she wanted, laughing. She woke up smiling, not because she wanted that version of freedom now, but because she wasn't afraid of it anymore. She trusted herself, trusted her boundaries, trusted that even if life shifted again, she'd adjust. She always had. Natalie had started teaching mini-budget workshops at her nonprofit. Nothing fancy, no certifications, just a few coworkers, a whiteboard, and a message. Budgeting doesn't make you a robot. It makes you a navigator. And they listened. Because she didn't come with spreadsheets and superiority. She came with stories. About being broke. About bouncing back. About the shame of takeout and the healing power of a thrifted scarf. And the message landed. They started journaling. One coworker started a coffee joy fund. Another automated $25 to a Roth IRA. Not radical, but real. And for Natalie, this was the full circle moment. Not just managing her own life, but helping others manage theirs. With grace, with humanity, with language that made space for imperfection. On the last day of that month, she sat on her balcony again, this time with a glass of wine and a slice of grocery store cake. She lit a candle, opened her notebook, wrote, "This is freedom, not the absence of responsibility, but the presence of peace." Because she still had debt, still had goals, still had tough months, but she wasn't scared anymore. And that, for her, was the most valuable thing money had ever bought. The call came at 8:47 p.m. Natalie had just finished dinner, leftover rice with roasted carrots and tahini, when her phone lit up with Tara's name. She answered without hesitation. T. There was silence. Then the kind of breathing you recognize instantly, shallow, shaky, full of something that hadn't yet been said. "He's gone." Natalie froze, then sat down. "What? Who?" "My dad. This afternoon. Heart attack." The next 2 hours were a blur of tissue boxes, back and forth pacing, and Tara's voice breaking in unexpected places. They'd been roommates for 3 years, friends for longer, and now, family by proximity. Natalie didn't try to say the right thing. She just stayed, held space, let the grief arrive like waves on hardwood floors. But by the next morning, the shock had cracked open into logistics. Funeral planning, flights, lost wages from time off work, legal paperwork, hotel costs near Tara's childhood home in Arizona. Tara hadn't budgeted for this. Whoever does. She had savings, about $300, give or take. She had credit, but it was already half full. She had PTO, but only 2 days available. And now, grief was colliding with reality. Natalie watched it unfold. The spreadsheet of sorrow, the math of mourning. And she knew this wasn't her crisis. But it still became her decision. Because Tara, through bleary eyes and a crumpled hoodie, looked up and whispered, "I don't know how I'm going to afford this." Natalie looked back at her own budget. It was tight, like always. She had just under $800 in her emergency fund, $140 in her checking. And 3 weeks until payday. But still, there was no question. I've got you. I'll cover the flight. That $289 plane ticket hit like a stone in the pond of her spreadsheet. Ripples immediately spread. She'd have to pause the extra debt payment, hold off on replenishing her car fund, cut back on joy to almost nothing. But she didn't hesitate. Because sometimes, financial security isn't just for you. It's for the people you love when they can't carry their own storm. And Natalie? She had finally built something strong enough to share. Helping Tara was messy. Not in gesture, but in aftermath. They spent the next few nights planning logistics over bowls of instant noodles. Booked hotels using points Natalie had been saving. Split meals. Calculated baggage fees, like war generals reviewing a battle plan. And when Tara left that Friday morning, Natalie stood at the door, hugged her hard, and said, "Don't worry about money while you're grieving. We'll figure out later." She returned to an apartment that suddenly felt quieter, heavier, more fragile. And she felt it, that fear, that old panic whispering. You just messed up your budget. You're going backwards. But then she remembered. This was why she budgeted. Not just to thrive, but to help, to show up. That weekend, she made the hardest spreadsheet update she'd made in months. She rewrote her emergency fund balance from $792 to $503. A little over $289 lost. But something else gained. Proof that her plan could bend for life and not break. In her journal, she wrote, "Helping someone in crisis isn't a financial setback. It's an act of wealth. Wealth is being able to say, I've got you, even when it hurts a little." Tara returned a week later, exhausted, puffy-eyed, grateful. She handed Natalie a card. Inside was a folded $60. "It's not much, but I'll pay you back, I promise." Natalie shook her head. "Let's not talk about debt between friends. Let's talk about love and balance. You needed support. I had support to give. That's it." Still, they made a plan. Tara wanted to contribute again, to feel steady. So they sat down together and created a new crisis cushion category in Tara's budget. $20 a month. Slow, doable, empowering. It wasn't repayment. It was resilience. Natalie updated her own "Why I Budget" list in her journal. So I can sleep. So I can breathe. So I can build. So I can help. That last one, that was new and sacred. The following month, Tara surprised her with dinner. Homemade enchiladas, candlelit table, and a handwritten card that read, "Because I'm still here, thanks to you." Natalie teared up. Not because of the meal, but because she realized she wasn't budgeting for herself anymore. She was budgeting for her community, her friendships, her circle, and that felt richer than any net worth ever had. Her money was now a map, not just to survive, but to serve, to stand in the gap, to create a ripple of safety, one choice at a time. Because financial freedom didn't mean doing everything alone. It meant building enough strength to hold someone else when they couldn't stand. And Natalie had done just that. It started with a late payment. Not huge, not catastrophic, just one electric bill that slipped through the cracks. Natalie had missed it by 4 days. A $15 late fee, an email reminder, and an emotional spiral she hadn't seen coming. Because she wasn't just upset. She was furious. With herself. Not for the bill, but for what it represented. You're slipping again. That's what her inner critic whispered. You're losing grip. It didn't matter that she'd been consistent for months. Didn't matter that her budget was still intact. This one miss felt like proof. Proof that she wasn't really changed. That all her progress was paper thin. And for the first time in a long time, Natalie felt like quitting. It was a Tuesday. Gray skies. Rain against the windows. She sat on the floor, laptop open, glaring at the spreadsheet she once loved. Now it felt like judgment, like a mirror that only showed the cracks. There was a red cell in the utility column. The late payment. The breach in the dam. She closed the laptop and curled up on the couch. Didn't journal. Didn't track. Didn't prep anything. Just scrolled. Mindless, heavy, empty. The next few days blurred. She skipped her budget check-in. Ignored her financial podcasts. Bought takeout twice. Not because she didn't have food, but because she needed something easy. She kept receipts balled up in her coat pocket, unread. And every time she passed her budget notebook on the desk, she looked away. Shame was back. Not loud, but steady. It whispered that she had failed. And worse, that she would always fail eventually. By Friday, she was avoiding her email. There was a bank statement waiting, a subscription she'd forgotten to cancel, a text from Tara asking if she was okay. Natalie didn't answer any of it, because she didn't want to be seen like this. In the dip, in the low, in the unraveling. But that night, something small shifted. She was brushing her teeth, eyes bleary, heart heavy, when she looked at the sticky note still taped to her mirror. It had been there for months, fading slightly. You're not starting over. You're continuing. She stared at it, felt her breath catch. Because that was the lie, wasn't it? That she'd undone everything. But the truth? She still had systems, still had skills, still had a buffer, still had herself. Natalie rinsed her mouth, walked to the kitchen, and opened her laptop. Hands trembling slightly, she opened her budget file. The spreadsheet was still there, waiting, not judging, just numbers. And slowly, she started to breathe again. She fixed the late payment cell, updated her receipts, recalculated her savings goal. Her emergency fund was still at $512. Her credit card balance hadn't jumped. Rent had been paid. Groceries still in stock. I didn't destroy anything, she whispered. She opened her journal, wrote slowly, with shaking hands. I felt like quitting, but I didn't. And that means something. That means I'm different now. The next day, she met up with Tara for coffee. Tara could tell something was off. Natalie admitted it. The spiral, the shame, the internal storm. Tara listened quietly, then nodded. I've had those too, she said. Even this month. I skipped my tracker all week. We're still here. That line. We're still here. It landed like grace. Because budgeting wasn't a competition. It was a process. And processes allow for pauses. That Sunday, Natalie did something new. She created a new tab in her spreadsheet, titled it Resilience Logs. It wasn't for numbers. It was for narratives. Moments like this. She wrote, April, week 3, missed utility bill, late fee, $15. Emotional spiral. Considered quitting. Didn't quit. Fixed it in 2 days. Talked to Tara. Budget still standing. Then she color-coded the whole row green. Green meant growth. Not perfection, but recovery. She made a new line item. Fall Recovery Fund, $10 per month. Not for money lost, but to remind herself, you can fall without failing. By the next week, her routines returned. Her journal, her joy spending, her meal plan. She wasn't fixed. She wasn't flawless. But she was functional again. And that mattered. The lesson wasn't about staying on track. It was about coming back when you slip. Returning with gentleness. Restarting without punishment. Natalie realized, budgeting isn't a straight line. It's a spiral staircase. You pass the same places again and again, but each time with new strength. She updated her mirror sticky note. Falling isn't failure. Quitting is. And I didn't quit. And just like that, she stepped into a new month. Still budgeting. Still tired. But now with more truth. More resilience. More grace. The grocery aisle used to feel like a trap. Bright lights. Endless choices. Tiny price tags whispering danger in disguise. And Natalie, with her cart half full and heart pounding, trying to do mental math fast enough to beat the checkout total. There had been months, too many, when the register beeped and the number flashed higher than expected, and she had to say, let's take that off, while pretending it didn't hurt. She once cried in the parking lot over strawberries that cost more than she planned. Once skipped dinner just to make the receipt make sense. Grocery budgeting wasn't just a task. It was a test of endurance. But that changed, slowly, imperfectly, with a spreadsheet. And a philosophy. Food is fuel, not failure. It started the month. She gave herself a challenge. Not a restriction. A redesign. She called it the $150 nourishment plan. The rules were simple. Feed herself for 30 days with $150. Include fresh produce weekly. 1 comfort food allowed. 1 backup pantry week for bad days. No shame if she adjusted. It wasn't a punishment. It was an experiment. Could she eat well, emotionally and nutritionally, on what she actually had? Could she find power where she once only felt panic? She spent a weekend studying receipts. Tracked what she'd bought in the past 3 months. What got wasted? What always ran out early? What filled her but didn't feed her? And what she discovered changed everything. First, she was overspending on variety. Too many one-time ingredients. Recipes that needed specialty sauces or one-use produce. So she pivoted, created a base list. 10 foods that were flexible, affordable, and comforting. Brown rice, lentils, frozen spinach, eggs, canned chickpeas, bananas, potatoes, oats, tortillas, carrots. From those 10, she mapped out 18 meals. Stir-fry, soup, wraps, hash, curries, overnight oats, banana pancakes. It wasn't gourmet, but it was sustainable. Second, she shopped once a week. No more just running in for milk and walking out $47 poorer. She made a ritual of it. Sunday mornings, after coffee, grocery list in hand, budgeted scan done. She also added a category to her envelope. Impulse/flex, $15. It allowed her to say yes to strawberries again, to buy the $3 sourdough if she was having a hard week, because budgets need room to breathe. And she wasn't just feeding a body. She was caring for a soul. That first month was clunky. She burned the rice once, ran out of eggs by week 3, got bored of lentils, ate PB&J 3 nights in a row, but she didn't break. And at the end of the month, her total came to $146.84. More than the savings. It was the feeling that stayed with her. She had planned, adapted, fed herself with dignity. Not one meal skipped, not one panic moment at checkout, not one shame spiral in the parking lot. She made a new page in her journal. Power Foods Budget Edition. Not just what was cheap, but what made her feel capable. She listed oats, because they remind me I'm not starving. Lentils, because they stretch farther than I thought. Bananas, because they're always enough. Sourdough, because I deserve texture. Spinach, because I care about strength. It was poetry and practicality. Food is memory. Food is mastery. The second month, she tried batch cooking. Sundays became her reset and roast day. She roasted trays of carrots and potatoes, made a big pot of rice, washed spinach, portioned chickpeas into jars, prepped breakfast oats for the week. It took 2 hours, saved her 10, and gave her a feeling she hadn't known how to name until then. Relief. She wasn't scrambling every night. She wasn't ordering out because she was too tired. She wasn't grazing on toast and stress. She was feeding herself, like a person who mattered. She started posting photos online. Not aesthetic ones, just real ones. Mismatched containers. A fork balanced on a bowl. Banana bread from bruised leftovers. $2 dinner night. Felt like $12. People responded. DMs came in. You make this feel doable. Can you share that soup recipe? Trying your pantry week idea tonight. And Natalie smiled, because for the first time, her grocery budget didn't feel like isolation. It felt like connection. She created a Google Doc, shared it with friends. Titled, Eat Well, Spend Less, Stress Never, Almost. Inside, a sample $150 plan. Recipes she'd adapted. Emotional notes. Good for sad days. Prep when low energy. Cheap but feels luxurious. It was more than a plan. It was proof that you could eat like you loved yourself, even when you only had $30 a week. Tara joined in. They started doing Sunday food swaps. Natalie would make a chickpea curry. Tara made a pasta bake. They'd trade portions. Double variety without double cost. It was fun. It was bonding. It was nourishment in more ways than one. She still had bad days. Still opened the fridge and sighed. Still got tired of rice. But now she had a toolkit, a backup plan, a map. Natalie updated her budget file. Under groceries, she added a note. This category isn't just about food. It's about safety, about choice, about proving I can meet my needs without losing my joy. And that, more than the dollars, was what made her grocery budget finally work. They'd been dancing around it for months. The money talk, the one that hovered like a quiet fog between Tara and Natalie. Not heavy, not hostile, just unfinished. Since the emergency trip to Arizona, things had returned to normal. They meal prepped, swapped recipes, shared podcast recs, laughed at memes. But every time Tara mentioned her budget or an upcoming expense, Natalie felt it, that tight pinch in her chest. Because they hadn't really talked about the money, the help, the cost. And Natalie, for all her tracking, journaling, and rule-bending wisdom, was still someone who hated talking about debt when love was involved. One Thursday night, they were both home early. The apartment was warm with the smell of garlic and chickpeas. Natalie was stirring a pot on the stove when Tara, barefoot and holding 2 mugs of tea, said, "Can we talk?" Just like that. Natalie turned, nodded slowly, set the spoon down. They sat on the floor, their usual heart conversation spot. Cross-legged, close, safe. Tara took a breath. "I need to talk about the trip, about what you paid for, about how I've been avoiding it." Natalie blinked. "Okay, I've been meaning to pay you back. Or start. But I never figured out how to bring it up without making it weird. And then it kept getting later, and then I felt guilty, and then I just—" Natalie touched her arm. "You don't owe me anything, T." Tara shook her head. "But that's the thing. I do. And I also don't. And it's both. And it's hard to hold." Natalie smiled, bittersweet. "I know." They sat in silence for a moment. Just the hum of the pot on the stove and the city lights blinking through the blinds. Then Natalie said, slowly, "Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone?" Tara nodded. Natalie pulled her knees up. "There was a point, last year, when I had $17 in my account and rent was due in 2 days. I was too scared to tell you. I felt like if I was struggling, it meant I was failing. That I didn't belong here. In this city. In this friendship." Tara's eyes softened. "Why didn't you tell me?" Natalie shrugged. "Because money is the last secret. Even more than love. Or grief. It's the shame we're taught to carry alone." Tara sipped her tea, quiet, then said, "I've had overdraft fees I never admitted to. Took Uber when I couldn't afford it because I was too tired to care. I've told people I was busy when really, I just couldn't afford brunch." Natalie laughed, the kind that stings at the edges. "Same." Then, they really started talking. Not about budgets. About beliefs. The stories they'd inherited. Tara's dad, always hiding the bills, telling her don't worry about it. Natalie's mom, budgeting with scraps, but never explaining the why. The way schools had never taught them how to read a paycheck stub. The way budgeting always sounded like punishment. The way asking for help still felt like failure, even now. By the end of the conversation, something had broken, and something had mended. There was no official agreement. No repayment plan. Just truth. Lay bare. Between two women who'd carried too much in silence. The next day, they sat down with both of their laptops. Side by side. Natalie opened her spreadsheet. Tara opened hers. They compared line items. Shared tips. Swapped templates. Natalie showed Tara her resilience log and joy fund. Tara showed Natalie her mental health buffer. $40 a month, guilt-free. They weren't trying to out-frugal each other. They were building parallel maps. And for the first time, money wasn't an obstacle in their friendship. It was a bridge. A few weeks later, Tara did something that made Natalie cry. She handed her a small envelope with a note. "For helping me fly when I couldn't stand. For groceries, or flowers, or whatever makes your nervous system breathe. I love you." Inside, $60. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the repair, the respect, the mutuality, the reminder that giving and receiving are both sacred. That night, Natalie journaled. "We've been taught to fear money and worship independence. But interdependence is where real wealth lives." I didn't save Tara. We carried each other. That's what this whole thing is for. She updated her budget. Not the numbers, the narrative. She added a new category. Community fund. $15 per month. Not charity. Not obligation. Just space for kindness. A gas card for a friend. Soup for a neighbor. $5 Venmo for someone's rough day. A recognition that money is not just math. It's movement, energy, love, expressed in a language of bills and barcodes. Months later, they'd reflect on that conversation, the one that changed everything. And they'd agree. Budgeting saved their finances. But honesty saved their friendship. Because the biggest shift wasn't in Natalie's grocery plan or her debt snowball. It was in her understanding of money as relational. Not private, not shameful, not solo, but shared, tender, and worthy of being spoken aloud, without fear. There wasn't a single moment. No parade. No bank notification saying you did it. But on a breezy afternoon in early June, Natalie stepped into a secondhand bookstore and realized, without panic, that she could afford the book in her hand. It was poetry. $6. Used. Dog-eared. She held it like a relic. And then she smiled. Because the smile didn't come with a caveat. Didn't come with guilt. Didn't require a spreadsheet check. It just came. And in that moment, she knew. She wasn't budgeting to survive anymore. She was budgeting to build. She walked home with a book tucked under her arm, past the same coffee shop where she used to say no to herself, past the bus stop where she'd once cried quietly into her scarf after checking her overdraft, past the grocery store that once terrified her. But she wasn't scared anymore, and the weight she carried was lighter now, not because life had become easier, but because she had become stronger. Natalie Reyes had changed, not all at once, but dollar by dollar, boundary by boundary, month by month, and now it showed. The signs were everywhere. She noticed it when she paid her rent a week early, when she clicked pay extra on her credit card just because she could, when she said no to a brunch invite, not out of fear, but because she genuinely wanted a quiet morning at home. Her choices weren't based on lack anymore. They were based on intention. That weekend, she hosted a budget-plus brunch circle in her apartment. 6 women, all of them friends. Some close, some new. Each brought food. Each brought their stories. Natalie made banana pancakes and printed out blank templates. Not rigid ones, just a gentle framework. What do you value? What does peace look like in your bank account? What's your version of enough? They sat cross-legged on floor cushions with tea mugs in hand, laughing, tearing up, scribbling notes in colored pens. It wasn't about numbers. It was about naming the life they actually wanted. After the last guest left, Natalie cleaned up slowly, stacked the plates, watered her plants, lit a lavender candle, and then she sat down and looked around her apartment, noticing every little detail. The cozy throw blanket, the framed budget mantra above her desk, the envelopes tucked neatly in their tray, the sticky notes that once held desperation, but now just held reminders of strength. And she whispered to herself, "You did it." Not because the debt was gone, not because the emergency fund was full, but because she was free. Free from the narrative that she'd always be behind. Free from the belief that money had to mean shame. Free from the idea that budgeting had to hurt. She went to her journal, the one she'd filled over the past year. Page after page of breakdowns, bounce backs, and brave decisions. On the last page, she wrote, "I used to tell myself I wasn't good with money, but I was wrong. I just hadn't been taught how to make it mine. I don't follow a rule anymore. I follow what brings peace. And I'm proud of the woman I've become." That night, she walked out onto her small balcony. The city lights twinkled. A breeze kissed her skin, and Natalie stood there, barefoot on cracked tile, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Wholeness. Not because she had everything, but because she had enough. And enough was beautiful. She reflected on the version of herself from 2 years ago. Panicked, frazzled, guilty every time she bought groceries. Carrying her mom, her bills, her debt, her fear, alone. That woman had survived, and built the foundation, and fought for clarity. And now, she had become someone new. Not someone rich, not someone perfect, but someone empowered. Someone who knew how to pivot, how to rebuild, how to say no without apology, how to say yes without fear. Someone who could cry without crumbling, budget without breaking, and give without losing herself. Natalie didn't realize she'd started crying until the breeze dried the first tear on her cheek. Not grief this time, not exhaustion, but something else. A quiet weeping of arrival. She had arrived at a life that respected her, because she had built it too. Not quickly, not painlessly, but intentionally. She took a photo of her journal that night, posted it with a caption. "I didn't just fix my budget. I rewrote the story I was telling myself about who I am. And I'm never going back." Messages flooded in. Strangers, old classmates. One woman wrote, "You're telling the story I didn't know I needed. Thank you." Another, "I started tracking my spending again after reading your words. I'm not ashamed anymore." Natalie saved those messages, printed them, taped them inside a folder titled, "Proof of Progress." Because sometimes, when life feels overwhelming, you need receipts, not just of what you spent, but of what you changed. She reread the old budgeting articles she'd once clung to. The 50/30/20 rule. The minimalist cash diets. The cut your avocado toast advice. And she smiled, because those guides helped once. But they were never her. She hadn't just learned to budget. She'd learned to budget as herself. With softness. With boundaries. With a joy column. With a burnout buffer. With a community fund. With grace for hard months. And space for celebration. The next morning, Natalie stood at her kitchen counter, sipping coffee, gazing out the window. And in that moment, She didn't feel like she was catching up anymore. She felt like she was ahead, not financially, maybe, but spiritually, emotionally, strategically. She was in control, and control didn't look like spreadsheets. It looked like peace, like permission, like poetry. And for once, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. Natalie used to believe there was one right way to budget. She just hadn't found it yet. She downloaded every free template, listened to every money podcast, tried the 50/30/20 rule, tried zero-based budgeting, tried the envelope method, tried giving every dollar a job. Even if that job was just buy frozen vegetables and hope for the best. Each method helped for a while, but none of them fit forever. They were like borrowed clothes, close to her size, but always just a little too tight in the shoulders or too loose at the waist. They were rigid. She was not. It took her a year to realize this truth. The point of budgeting isn't to follow a rule. It's to design a rhythm, one that moved with her, not against her, one that flexed through grief, through joy, through Tuesdays that felt like Fridays, and Fridays that felt like collapse, one that allowed space for her humanity. That summer, Natalie sat down at her dining table, opened a blank Google Doc, and typed, "My budgeting philosophy, version 3.1. She stared at the blinking cursor for a while, then began typing, not with numbers, but with truths, not instructions, not rules, principles. 1. Budgets are emotional. Start with feelings, not figures. Every Sunday, she now began her check-ins with this question. How did I feel about money this week? Not what she spent, not what she saved, but what it felt like. Tight, panicked, freeing, avoidant, empowered. Because numbers might reflect behavior, but feelings reveal patterns. And healing doesn't happen in math. It happens in honesty. 2. I am the architect of my plan. The tools are not my gods. Natalie no longer bowed to the 50/30/20 rule. Instead, she treated it like scaffolding, a place to begin, not a place to stay. Her real ratio looked more like this. 68% needs, 12% joy, 10% debt, 10% savings. And it worked. Because it was hers. Because it respected her reality. No shame. Just structure with softness. 3. Budgeting is not a performance. It's a relationship. She stopped budgeting to prove anything. To herself. To anyone online. To the imaginary financial expert watching over her shoulder. Now, she treated her spreadsheet like a mirror. Not a spotlight. A reflection of who she was becoming. A place to ask questions. To make mistakes. To learn. 4. Financial wellness isn't about never feeling stress. It's about returning to peace more quickly. Natalie still had setbacks. Still miscalculated. Still impulse order Thai food on stressful Wednesdays. But now, recovery was built into her system. She had her fall recovery fund. Her burnout buffer. Her weekly review questions. She didn't have to pretend she was fine. She just had to promise herself that she'd return. To the plan. To the path. To herself. 5. Money is not just personal. It's communal. She tied her time. Donated $15 a month to a mutual aid fund. Kept her community envelope full enough to buy lunch for a friend in crisis or cover someone's bus fare without thinking twice. Budgeting wasn't just about surviving capitalism. It was about resisting isolation. Wealth, she realized, was about the ability to say, "You're not alone. I've got you." Even if that meant splitting a sandwich in two. Her new system, it wasn't color-coded. It wasn't strict. It didn't promise financial independence by 40. But it worked. It held her. Because it was built from her own experience. Tested in the fires of overdrafts, panic, tears, and tiny triumphs. Reinforced by quiet victories and the soft power of persistence. Natalie began sharing this philosophy more publicly. She turned it into a small workshop at her local library. 5 women showed up. Then 10. Then a recurring series. She called it Budgeting for Real Life. Your money, your way. No judgment. No jargon. Just safe space, worksheets with more prompts than formulas, and permission to be human. She shared her rules. No shame. No spreadsheets before snacks. No budgeting while burned out. Always budget with your future self in the room. People started showing up not just for the numbers, but for the language, the soul of it. A woman once told her, You made me feel like I could belong to myself again, even in a bank app. And that, more than any balance, was the reward. Natalie's phone background was now a simple phrase. A budget like I love myself. She saw it every day. When checking balances. When calculating. When pausing. When forgiving. That summer, she finally deleted all her old budget templates. The ones with formulas she didn't understand. The ones with red text that made her feel small. The ones that said, ideal, like it was a threat. She created one new sheet. She titled it, Rhythm Rules. And in it, she wrote, budgeting is not about obedience. It's about orientation. Each dollar is a direction, and I choose to walk toward peace. Her calendar had changed, too. Every first Saturday of the month was now a ritual. She called it Budgeting Sabbath. Not a task day, a reflection day. She brewed her favorite coffee, lit a candle, played the same lo-fi playlist, opened her journal and spreadsheet with equal reverence. She asked, what brought me joy this month? Where did I overspend? And what does that tell me? Did I feel safe? What do I want next month to feel like? Then she planned, not with fear, but with faith. Natalie didn't have a financial planner, didn't have 6 figures in savings, didn't have a trust fund waiting, but she had a rhythm, a system, a philosophy built on her own lived wisdom. And that was more than enough. She hadn't broken the rules. She'd rewritten them into something softer, kinder, truer. And in doing so, she hadn't just saved money. She had saved herself. Natalie never thought she'd talk to her mother about budgeting. Not really. Not beyond comments like, gas is expensive again. Or, pagas la luz. Money in their house had always been something you managed quietly. You didn't talk about it unless there was a problem. You didn't complain unless someone was already crying. You didn't plan. You just made it stretch. It was survival, not strategy. Sacrifice, not structure. And for most of Natalie's life, her mother, Teresa, had been the queen of making do. She could stretch a $20 bill across 4 days like it was magic, could fix a loose hem, reuse foil, and make dinner out of a potato and prayers. But she didn't budget. Not formally. Not with categories and goals. And certainly not with any kind of confidence. She carried money the way a woman carries an old injury, learned to live with a limp. So when Natalie first thought of asking her mom to go over finances together, the anxiety flared. What if she felt judged? What if she thought it meant Natalie didn't trust her? What if her mom said, no necesito eso? But the idea wouldn't leave her. Especially not after Teresa mentioned, offhand, during a phone call that her credit card had gone to collections. It's only like $900, she'd said. They keep calling. I just ignore it. Natalie's stomach twisted. She'd been there. The dread. The voicemails. The avoidance. It wasn't just debt. It was emotional weight. And her mother had carried so much already. Natalie drove down to Stockton that weekend. Brought tamales from the spot near her apartment. Showed up like it was just a normal visit. And for a few hours, they talked about neighbors. About Tara. About the neighbor's grandson who had crashed his bike again. It wasn't until Teresa brought out a shoebox of unopened mail that Natalie asked, Mama, can we sit down and look at this stuff together? Teresa paused, looked at her, the kind of look that lasts longer than a second. Then she sighed. I guess it's time. They sat at the small kitchen table where Natalie had eaten her first spoonful of arroz con leche, where her mom used to count coupons on Sunday nights while watching novellas, now held envelopes, a calculator, 2 cups of chamomile tea, and Natalie's laptop, open to a blank spreadsheet labeled Teresa's Peace Plan. Her mom raised an eyebrow at the title. Mija, you think a spreadsheet can give me peace? Natalie smiled gently. Not by itself, but maybe the plan we build can. For the next 2 hours, they went line by line. Natalie didn't teach, she invited. She asked questions, wrote things down slowly, let silence happen when it needed to. Didn't correct, just listened. Her mother's income, $1,427 a month in Social Security and part-time seamstress work. Her expenses, rent, subsidized senior housing $435, utilities, $1.90, groceries, $1.50, cell phone, $35, bus pass, $25, medication copays, $1.45, church donation, $30, untracked everything else. Debt, 1 credit card, balance of $938 in collections. Interest rate, unknown. Minimum payment, never met. Natalie typed as her mom talked, her heart tightening at the margins. Then came the moment. Natalie gently asked, "Do you want to build a plan where that card goes away?" Her mother looked at her hands. Calloused, gentle, always moving, now still. "I want to stop thinking about it every night before bed." And that was all Natalie needed. Because that's what budgeting could be. A sleep aid, a permission slip, a prayer with a payment plan. They built a new structure. Groceries, trimmed by $20 with coupons Natalie helped her set up online. Church donation, dropped slightly to $20 temporarily. Teresa resisted, but Natalie reframed it. You're still giving. You're also giving yourself space to breathe. Bus pass, check for a senior discount she hadn't known about, reduced to $12. Everything else became toiletries, $10. Laundry, $6. Emergency envelope, $15. Debt snowball, $50 a month. Natalie called the collection agency while her mom sat nearby. She negotiated, got them to freeze interest, agreed to pay $50 per month with no late fees. Teresa watched her like she was watching someone cast a spell. After the call, she asked, "How did you learn to do that?" Natalie just smiled. One spreadsheet, and a lot of hard days. They wrote out a 19-month payoff plan. Teresa stared at it. "That's a long time." Natalie shrugged. "It's steady. It's doable. It ends." Teresa nodded slowly, took a sip of tea, then asked, "Will you help me track it? I don't like the computer thing." Natalie's chest warmed. "We'll do it together. Paper, stickers, whatever you want. This is your plan." Before she left that night, Natalie taped a new sheet of paper to the fridge. A handwritten tracker. Each box equals $50. Total, 19 boxes. Top of the page, Teresa's peace plan. Her mom chuckled. That name again. Natalie grinned. It fits better now. Driving home, Natalie cried. Because she wasn't just healing her own relationship with money. She was healing a legacy. For decades, they'd both been carrying fear, avoiding truths, living inside systems not built for them. But tonight, they had written a new chapter, together. And that night, Natalie wrote in her journal, "I taught my mother to budget today. But really, I gave her back a sense of control. And in doing that, I realized I have broken a generational chain. The shame ends here." It began with a whisper, a quiet, persistent tug in her chest that said, "You're tired. Not just sleepy, worn, hollow." Natalie ignored it for a while. She kept waking up at 6:15, making oatmeal, checking her planner, and pretending the ache behind her eyes was just allergies. But by the second week of August, she knew. She wasn't just tired. She was done. It had been 18 months since she first opened a spreadsheet and dared to believe she could change her financial life. Since then, she had paid off over $4,000 in debt, built an emergency fund, created systems, taught classes, helped her mom build a peace plan, kept her fridge stocked through 3 price hikes and a summer heat wave. She had done all of it on purpose, with focus, with determination, with grace. But now, her body was asking for something she hadn't built into any budget. Stillness. That weekend, she canceled plans, turned off notifications, closed the laptop. She sat on her couch with a blanket, staring out the window for hours. Didn't journal, didn't calculate, didn't optimize. She just existed. And it was strange, scary even, because she was so used to motion, to self-improvement, to the buzz of always doing something useful. But this month, something shifted. She looked at her budget file and whispered, "Can I make space for rest? Not just squeeze it in, not steal it from another category, but design for it." She renamed her September budget, the gentle month, and her rules, they were simple. Cut extra goals in half. Pause debt snowball payments. Focus on minimums only. Increase joy from $40 to $60. Add a new line. Rest fund, $25. She didn't need a vacation. She just needed permission to not always be hustling, to let soft days be enough. She asked herself, what does rest even look like for me? It wasn't sleeping all day. It was slow cooking soup while jazz played in the background. It was saying no without guilt. It was sitting on the floor with a poetry book and not turning it into content. It was walking without headphones. Bats on weeknights. Letting dishes wait till morning. Calling her aunt just to hear her voice. It was sacred slowness. One Sunday, she built her first rest week plan. Instead of batch cooking 7 meals and prepping 3 breakfasts, she made just one big pot of lentil stew. She bought sandwich fixings, gave herself permission to eat the same thing for 3 days. Instead of scheduling 6 financial tasks, she picked 2. Instead of trying to stay on top of everything, she paused. She texted Tara, "This is my gentle month. I'm taking things slow on purpose." Tara replied, "I love that. I might need one too." Natalie smiled. Because healing is contagious. When one woman stops running, others learn it's okay to stop too. She created a new journal spread. Rest looks like enlisted, not replying immediately. Reading for pleasure, not learning. Letting inboxes be messy. Canceling plans when my soul whispers, "Not today." Spending money without punishment. Using joy money for naps and comfort food. Lowering the bar. Being okay with good enough. And her budget responded beautifully. She spent less on takeout because she wasn't emotionally starving. She skipped impulse buys because she didn't feel desperate for escape. She stayed within her grocery budget because she wasn't trying to impress anyone, not even herself. Rest had become its own kind of discipline. Not lazy, not weak, wise. Mid-month, she checked her spreadsheet and realized her spending was actually lower than usual. Because when she slowed down, she didn't try to buy relief. She created it. With boundaries, with softness, with space. She reflected on something she'd heard once. You don't have to earn rest by exhausting yourself. She wrote it on a sticky note and stuck it above her mirror. Because that was the real breakthrough. Rest was no longer the prize at the end of productivity. It was part of the plan. She restructured her categories again. Debt minimum stayed. Joy stayed. Sinking funds paused. Rest fund expanded to $40. It covered a massage at the community clinic, a new pair of slippers, a full day off from everything, with no guilt, no calls, no budget apps. At the end of the month, she sat on a balcony, tea in hand, spreadsheet open, and she cried. Not from stress, not from fear, from relief. Because for the first time in years, she had completed a month without burning herself to the edge. She had been gentle, and nothing had fallen apart. In fact, things had flourished. She wrote in her journal, "Rest is not the opposite of progress. It's part of the cycle, and I am finally learning to move with seasons, not against them." That night, she lit her lavender candle, turned off the lights, played soft cello music, and whispered to herself, "I am not behind. I am healing, and that is a form of wealth." The air was changing, not just the weather, though September was sliding into October with cooler mornings and soft golden afternoons. Something else. Inside her. A feeling Natalie hadn't let herself explore in years. Possibility. Not the frantic kind. Not the fix everything now urgency that used to drive her. But something deeper. A whisper. What if you let yourself dream again? It started with a question. From someone she never expected. They were at the nonprofit office. Natalie finishing up a spreadsheet for an upcoming outreach grant. When her manager, Carlene, stopped by her desk. She wore her usual glasses and cardigans, carrying 3 folders and a lopsided tote bag. "Hey Nat, got a second?" Natalie nodded, saved her file, pushed back from her desk. Carlene dropped the folders onto a chair and said, "I heard about the budgeting circles you've been hosting." Natalie blinked. "Oh yeah, just a side thing. Sundays, sometimes Saturdays." Carlene tilted her head. "People are talking. In a good way. Someone from HR sat in last week. She said it was the first time she didn't feel ashamed talking about debt." Natalie felt her chest rise, then fall. She wasn't sure where this was going. Carlene continued, "I wanted to ask, have you ever thought about leading financial wellness full-time?" Natalie blinked again. "Wait, like here? Here, or somewhere like here?" "Honestly, I think there's a gap. We've got benefits workshops, sure, but nobody's teaching real people how to budget after rent, groceries, and caregiving wipe out 80% of their paycheck." Natalie sat frozen. Carlene took a step closer. "You have a gift. You make numbers feel like care. You don't preach. You listen. That's rare. And it's needed." Then, softly, "If we pitch this as a pilot program, would you be interested?" Natalie's world tilted, just a few degrees, but enough to feel it. A pilot program. Her own curriculum. Maybe even a new role. One built from her own ashes. She swallowed. I'd have to think about it." Carlene smiled. "Think as long as you need. I'm just saying, It's not a wild idea. It's your next chapter knocking. Then she walked off. Natalie sat still for a long time. The cursor blinked on her screen. Emails pinged. But all she heard was that one sentence. It's your next chapter knocking. That night, she called Tara. They sat on the couch with popcorn and ginger tea. Natalie told her everything. Carlene's offer, the hesitation, the fear. Tara listened, nodded, then asked, "Why does it scare you?" Natalie hesitated. Because I only just got stable. What if I mess it up again? What if I'm not qualified? What if budgeting is only something that saved me, not something I can teach professionally? Tara raised an eyebrow. Didn't you already teach your mom? Didn't you already lead 3 workshops this month? Didn't you just help a coworker negotiate a rent? Natalie laughed. Okay. But that's different. Tara leaned in. Different how? Natalie opened her mouth, then closed it, because she realized it wasn't different. It was just the first time she was being seen for what she could really do. Later that night, Natalie sat with her journal. She didn't start with words. She drew a mountain, a candle, a laptop, a heart, an open hand. Then, beneath them all, she wrote, "What if I stopped just surviving my story and started sharing it?" She thought back to her younger self, the girl who used to believe budgeting was for other people, the woman who cried in the checkout line, the version of her who believed debt was a life sentence. And now, she was being asked to turn all of that into a platform, a curriculum, a movement, not because she was perfect, but because she had walked through fire and took notes. The next morning, she opened a new Google Doc, titled it Financial Wellness from the Inside Out, and started building. Week 1, Money Stories. Week 2, Feelings Before Figures. Week 3, Building a Real-Life Budget. Week 4, Rest, Joy, and Community. No gimmicks, no shame, just honesty, and small, sustainable steps. By the end of the week, she emailed Carlene back. Subject: Interested in the pilot. Let's talk. And with one click, her future took a step closer. She didn't quit her job. Not yet. But something inside had shifted. Natalie had spent a year rebuilding her life around truth. Now, she was ready to let that truth serve others. Her budget didn't change drastically, but she added a new line. Education fund, $30 per month. For books, courses, or the business license she was starting to research quietly on weekends. She created a new envelope. Seed money. For whatever came next. No pressure. Just preparation. Because dreams grow best in soil that's ready. The following Sunday, Natalie stood in front of 12 women in the community center library. All different ages. All holding notebooks. All with that same mix of hope and hesitation she remembered in herself. She took a breath, opened her journal, and began. "Hi, I'm Natalie. I used to think budgeting was about numbers, but it's really about safety. And today, I want to help you feel safe again, with money, and with yourself." 12 heads nodded, and a chapter began. Natalie Reyes used to believe freedom had a number. She thought it might look like $10,000 in savings, or zero balance on her credit cards, maybe a high credit score, or a paid-off car. But now, 2 years after that first panic spreadsheet, she knew better. Freedom had never been about the math. It was about her relationship to it, her ownership, her truth. It was how she woke up in the morning, without the pit in her stomach. How she sat at her kitchen table, no longer afraid to look at her bank account. How she planned weekends, not around scarcity, but with intention and joy. And most of all, how she talked to herself. That inner voice. It was different now. Still cautious. Still practical. But no longer cruel. She had rewritten her tone. And with it, her life. It was early November now. Cool air. Hot coffee. Leaves tumbling down the sidewalks like time. Natalie walked home from the community center with a tote bag full of workshop evaluations. She had just wrapped her 6th session. 12 women. 3 languages. Countless tears and triumphs. One woman hugged her and whispered, "I didn't think someone like me was allowed to be good with money." Natalie whispered back, "You already are. You just needed someone to tell you the truth." That night, she spread the evaluation sheets across her dining table. Words written in shaky ink. "I never thought of a budget as self-care. I finally forgive myself for the debt. My husband and I talked about money without yelling. That's new. This class gave me peace." Natalie read them all, then folded her arms on the table and let herself cry. Not from grief, Not from fear, from fulfillment. She had helped people not just count their dollars, but reclaim their dignity. And that, she realized, was the real currency of freedom. Later, she opened her own budget spreadsheet. It looked peaceful. Nothing surprising. Nothing scary. Rent, covered. Groceries, planned. Debt, under $6,000 now, and falling. Emergency fund, holding strong at $910. Joy fund, spent on a beautiful scarf she'd thrifted for $4 and wore like armor. There was room. There was rhythm. There was rest. And more than anything, there was no panic. She clicked on the second tab, Reflections, where she logged not just spending, but becoming. She added a new entry. I taught women how to love their money. And in doing so, I saw my own value more clearly. Then she looked at the top of the document, at the title she'd typed and never changed. Budgeting My Way to Peace. Natalie smiled, because that's exactly what she'd done. Not just for herself, but for everyone she touched along the way. A few days later, she sat across from her mom in the living room. Teresa was coloring in another $50 box on her fridge tracker. Only 8 left now. Mija, she said, tapping the pen. Almost there. Natalie grinned. You're crushing it, Ma. Thanks to you. Natalie shook her head. No, thanks to us. That night, she journaled one last time before closing the book she'd kept for over a year. The journal that had traveled with her through breakdowns, breakthroughs, and rebuilding. Her final page read, I didn't just pay off debt. I learned to listen, to pause, to ask myself what I need, not just what I owe. I no longer believe in perfect budgets. I believe in peaceful ones. This is not the end. This is a threshold. The rest of my life begins here. She closed the journal, slid it into a drawer, lit a candle, and breathed. There would still be bills, still be hard days, still be setbacks. But now she had tools, a system, a support circle, a relationship with herself that was rooted in care, not criticism. And for the first time since she was 20, money no longer felt like a threat. It felt like possibility. Natalie's version of financial freedom didn't include a yacht or a house in the hills. It looked like grocery shopping without anxiety, paying rent without fear, knowing exactly what was in her checking account, and not flinching, saying no with love and yes without guilt, supporting her mom, texting Tara a Venmo for no reason, resting on purpose, teaching others how to feel whole again. She stepped into her kitchen the next morning, barefoot on cool tile, and opened her fridge. It was stocked, not extravagant, but enough. She made coffee, opened the curtains, watched the sun paint the buildings gold, and said out loud, this is mine, this life, this peace. I earned it, and I'll protect it. That weekend, she stood in front of a new class. This time, not just women from her community, but a group of teenage girls from a youth mentorship program. She smiled as she introduced herself. Hi, I'm Natalie. I used to be afraid of my own money. Now I help people fall in love with their budgets, because it's really about falling in love with your life. They leaned in, the way she once had, when she thought freedom was far away. But now, she was proof that it was not. Natalie Reyes didn't just fix her finances. She freed herself from shame, from scarcity, from systems that weren't made for her, from silence. And now, she walked forward, not perfectly, but powerfully. Budgeting, for her, was never about restriction. It was about remembrance, of worth, of possibility, of choice, of love, expressed in categories, envelopes, and the courage to keep going. Always. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever stared at your bank balance with a knot in your stomach or felt like budgeting was something you kept failing at, just know you are not alone and you're not broken. You don't have to follow someone else's rule to fix your finances. You can build your own rhythm. You can make space for rest. You can design a budget that honors your actual life. So if you're ready to take back your power, start today. Not with perfection, but with one small, honest step. Subscribe to Dollar by Dollar for more stories like Natalie's. And remember, you don't need more willpower. You just need a plan that fits the real you. Like the video, tap the like button so we know this helped you. Share your own budgeting breakthrough in the comments. And subscribe for new, real-life money stories every week. Because financial education shouldn't feel like punishment. It should feel like freedom.